On the surface, Firewatch is a game about being a fire lookout, a job which nowadays barely sees any newcomers, with regulars taking on yearly as an ideal way to escape the hectic rhythm the modern world has taken pace to. It's also a job that those same veterans who, when asked questions about their profession by developers Campo Santo, query why on earth someone would want to make a game out of it. You play as Henry, a middle-aged, unfamiliar fit of a video game protagonist taking up the mantle of fire lookout at Shoshone National Park over the summer to get away from a harrowing event at home. Whereas tragedy has shaken Henry's life into disarray, he hosts a daily routine of a job that'll leave him alone with his thoughts and away from his problems, or at least provide a brief respite from the pain they're causing. For a while, it works. Within minutes of arriving at the tower that'll be Henry's home over the next few months, another lookout, Delilah, gets in touch with him to get a sense of who she'll be working with for the summer. And as the days pass, the two become close, despite remaining miles apart. Knowledge, stories, in-jokes, all develop over their walkie-talkies. And whilst the two bond over the boredom the job brings on, the tedium brings a sort of comforting routine when there's a friend over the airwaves to share it with. The job's good. The earliest challenge that actually prods Henry to take action forced him to deal with a couple of delinquent teens pestering peaceful tranquility with their litter-bugging, loud music and fireworks. No matter how peacefully you attempt to defuse the situation, you're accused of being a peeping Tom who's conveniently turned up to tell them off whilst they're skinny dipping. It's awkward, but hey, they go away and they're just a couple of little jerks, and at least you can say that this is part of the job description. What follows isn't as easy to shake off. On the way back to his tower, Henry notices a figure watching him in the distance, which wouldn't be so ominous if it weren't for the massive floodlight casting them in darkness. It wouldn't be so threatening if it didn't precede a break-in that pierces Henry's sense of safety just as he's getting his bearings. In a bid to stop those meddling kids causing any more trouble, Henry attempts to find their camp, but upon tracking it down, finds it torn to shreds. It's clearly a wild animal, but an accusatory note makes it seem the girls have already made their mind up about you. You, an innocent person just being a diligent volunteer, is in their eyes out to get them. Days later, news arrives that both girls have disappeared. You have no reason to feel guilty, you had nothing to do with them vanishing, but there's enough unreliable clues to make an unreliable cop suspicious of you. Delilah is convinced that neither of you should say anything to the police. Why complicate your days with inquiries to a crime, if that's what this is, neither of you truly know anything about? Your companion suddenly feels like she's becoming a confidant. It's best to take your mind off it. The sunsets are beautiful, the surroundings are peaceful, and you have a job you really should be focusing on. But then you discover something very suspicious. A day that begins like any other soon turns into a day of unwanted discoveries. Whilst hiking in the wilderness, Henry uncovers notes on his and Delilah's conversations. Someone has been making transcriptions on what the couple have been saying. Their flirting, their jokes, their acknowledgement of the missing girls. Its discovery leads to Henry being attacked, and in a bid to find clues, something to upgrade threat levels even further. Searching the surrounding area reveals a huge fenced-off area the maps claim is a meadow. The seasoned Delilah assumes it's correct, but she can't see why there's such an absurd level of security for just a meadow. On its own, it might not be so alarming, but with everything that's happened so far, a break-in, tampered communications with the outside world and missing persons, Henry and Delilah start to worry and begin trying to connect as little dots they have with a tenuous amount of thread. And as a player, you're doing the same. Getting into that restricted area becomes more important than anything. Forcing open the lock gate doesn't bring any answers, just more questions. Henry's greeted by an array of peculiar equipment sounding off bleeps for reasons unknown. Items that are tracking his movements, documents that seem to have pried into the couple's past, and transcriptions delving into their relationship. Is this one person? A group? How far up does this go? Why the hell is this happening? These oddities start a slow trickle of paranoia that echo in your skull, so loud you cannot ignore it, so frustrating that you can't find its source. It's impossible for our protagonist to ignore, and thanks to the bonds the game builds up over the few hours you've spent with it, it's incredibly hard as a player not to be invested in uncovering the truth it these bizarre happenings. Despite playing hundreds of games where I was told the stakes were remarkably high and there were globe-ending consequences for failure, this was where I felt the most in danger. Firewatch's masterclass in tension had riled up feelings in me that I had been dealing with for years, but that I had never gotten used to. I started playing Firewatch around the same time I started getting help for my depression and anxiety. That help being speaking with a professional, one of the better decisions I've made in my life. It meant that I could at least compartmentalize my illness in some ways to make sure it didn't seem like a force out of my control, and labeled what I said earlier as catastrophic thinking, where assumptions create absurdly apocalyptic hypotheticals dressed as reality. And these can crop up whenever, from something major to something as basic as saying hello to someone. My brain will start to analyze my body language, my tone, my inflection to see if I managed to perfect it on my first run, which I usually haven't. Now, thinking about it rationally, that's a very strange thing to say. How do you perfect a social interaction? But in the moment, your mind starts to fog up and rationality dissipates. And this fog, this mist, it starts to feel heavy. It starts to feel like my skull is weighed down so much that it's gonna hit the floor. I can dwell on the smallest of mistakes for hours, days, weeks, and the reason why I dwell on them is because I can't rationally think about them. I don't know where that mistake is going to lead to a failure and where that failure is going to put me potentially years from now. If it evolves into something major, potentially, I could lose people close to me. If I lose people close to me, I might end up losing my job. If I lose my job, I may end up losing my house, and who knows where to go from there. I just don't know how bad something slight can get. And then someone asks me how I am. We joke about something I can relate to, and the anxiety starts to dissipate. And I begin to think maybe, just maybe, my brain could dial it back a bit. Maybe this grudge match the world has against me doesn't actually exist. And then it starts again. But it's got more material to work with this time. It starts analysing the stutters in my responses, the sentences that trailed off, the jokes that didn't work, discrediting the half step of progress I made and doubling down on positivity of any kind, where the brain responds to a slight change in life's rhythm by chucking a bucket full of what-ifs for logic to attempt to contend with. The thing is, whilst these concerns always either amount to nothing or something that I can totally handle eventually, in the moment my brain can't pause and let me take a breath for reassurance. Life inherently moves too fast, and my thoughts are too unreliable to anchor into examples of self-confidence. It creates a boring, frustrating, self-deprecating, illogical rut. And it takes a lot to get out of these ruts. I may never be happy when I hear it, but whenever somebody offers the ill advice of just try to take your mind off things or relax, I can kind of see why they think these are simple, viable solutions. Everyone can experience anxiety. It's a natural response embedded in our brains that's meant to fade once the stress of a situation passes. But for me and others I've spoken to, it digs its claws in and latches on, unwilling to accept its time has passed. Many people I speak to when I talk about anxiety in games who can't see from this perspective think that horror titles are ideal for highlighting these issues, and to a certain degree, that's an apt association. But at least in the best of those games, the ones we revel in our fear of, there's moments of quiet. Calm after crescendos, dips in tension as well as peaks. Hell, even a game over screen can offer some solace. Failure can at least give you some kind of break from the anguish that will return you to a point you've played before where there's at least some familiarity. But after spending time to ground itself in normality, Firewatch starts to sow seeds of intrigue and doubt so far into your brain you feel you can't uproot them until the credits roll. Anxiety relies on a series of what-ifs that scratch away, demanding to be itched, but as soon as they are, they just fester into wounds. And with its ever-mounting conspiracies, Firewatch really likes to play with what-ifs. As the game enters its final act, Henry's desk and window are coated in notes, scraps of theories littering the area to create a fragmented network of connections with. A fire is slowly swallowing the forest, talks of evacuation begin. To anyone else, this would be a cause for concern, but to Henry it's a deadline, and to the player it's a cue. A sign that revelations must be coming soon. At this point, it's easy to let go of reality and assume any outcomes to be the truth in the endgame, no matter how peculiar they are. But nothing comes to confirm your wildest suspicions. There's no experiments or aliens or government cover-ups. The girls that went missing turn up later after a drunken haze. The bizarre equipment you found? It's just abandoned field equipment. And the silhouetted man? Whilst he was listening into your conversations, his tracking experiments are simple props to try and spook the parents and not delving into the caves to uncover his mistakes and dig up his past. He was a lookout who once spent his summer in Shoshone with his son. In an effort to bond with him, he took him climbing. His son slipped and fell and soon after died. For years he's been living in the mountains, suffering from PTSD. And whilst we could be pushed to believe that this was murder, his troubled tone suggests it truly was a mistake. All you've done is uncover painful memories and an accident that you can't change the result of. As the fire envelops the forest and the evacuation takes place, Delilah makes her way out just while you're closing the case. The player can beg for Delilah to hold on for just a moment as he rushes to her tower, but no matter how hard Henry pleads or how fast he can run, she's not there. She calls in, and as both stumble their way through conversations about what the future holds for both of them, they end up just nonchalantly joking with each other, softening the goodbyes the same way they made their hellos. Your evacuation chopper arrives, Henry leaves, and the credits roll. Initially, the ending to Firewatch received mixed responses. Some players were disappointed, seeing a juicy mystery disappear in the blink of an eye as wasted potential, and others were angry that they spent so long bonding with such a well-written character, only to never end up meeting her. But for me, I felt more relief than melancholy. Those feelings of anxiety built up for the last 2 hours peter out into a hushed finale. Normality sinks in, and life goes on. I thought the stew of tension Firewatch cooks up only catered to my mindset, but others I have known play it feel the same sense of unease throughout. Reflecting on how Firewatch mirrored my responses to crises in real life, in a safe environment, forced me to look on the outcomes of my own concerns. In the end, chasing down drama where there is none didn't provide any relief. Overthinking baseless theories doesn't make a conspiracy any truer, and doing so in Firewatch doesn't lead to an epic, grandiose conclusion that rights all wrongs. Dragging your only companion into uncovering an unconfirmed conspiracy doesn't encourage a push for justice, it just pushes her away. Firewatch perfectly mimics the thought patterns I fall into in moments of tension, but also perfectly encapsulates why I shouldn't be consumed by them. And it's something I can show others in a bid to give them at least some understanding as to how my thought processes are manipulated in these instances. It's very easy for those who don't dabble in games to find them somewhat intimidating. Tabletop games can have many intricate moving parts held together with a big bulk of easily forgettable rules. No matter how accepting the group you're playing them with is, it's forgivable for even a seasoned player to worry that they'll look like a fool for misinterpreting a strategy or just underperforming with no real idea of how that came to be. And whilst video game marketing has successfully sold the idea of regular schmucks like ourselves pulling off daring feats of fancy with a simple flurry of button presses, to do so requires refined coordination and reflexes around a multi-button device that only comes with experience. If a game had an amazing third act twist that you wanted to share with others, but it came at the 10th hour of a context-heavy campaign with reflex-dependent interims, then any newcomers you try to introduce the game to will get frustrated before they reach that pivotal moment that rung with you so loudly. Whenever someone I know struggles to understand my perspective and can't see how my illness tries to operate, how it attempts to deceive me, it's very easy for me to direct them towards Firewatch, a 2 to 3 hour game with simple controls and an incredibly engaging story. It's almost impossible not to be taken in by the game's deceptions under the guise of exceptional writing and narrators you can never really confirm as unreliable. Whilst Firewatch isn't a game that was directly made to cater to my position, it is one that is open-ended enough to add a new lens, a fresh perspective to those who find it hard to empathise with my experience. Hell, it probably sums it up quicker than I ever could. Firewatch has not magically cured me, but it has embellished itself in my life as a constant I can return to in times of need. Instead of being carried away by a wave of worries at life's most stressful moments, a quick run through can remind me of the lessons I learned on that first playthrough to anchor me back into reality and stop myself from slipping into vicious, self-destructive cycles. In this day and age, life moves so fast that it's so hard to stop and compartmentalise everything that's going on, and while some games offer a decent escape from real life and all of its stresses, I don't feel like they give you a chance to reflect. And that's why I feel like I owe Firewatch, or the developers Campo Santo, so much, because they've made a game that allows me to reflect on and express these negative feelings in a positive way, albeit not a completely fluent one, I'll give you that much. And I'm so glad I have a game like Firewatch to turn to in times of need, to reset the alarm bells in my brain and inform me that, not everything's a crisis. Because when you're in my position, that is such an important thing to have, and I think it's the reason why walking simulators have done so well. Whilst they may not focus on something purely for you, they still feel inherently personal. I've now got a new lens to looking at games and gathering more personal favourites based on my outlook of them. They've helped me come to terms with aspects of myself I consider flaws, and to forgive myself for not being perfect. On reflection, I realised they taught a young me that I shouldn't be ashamed for being shy and awkward, for it's my actions that mattered, not my words or lack thereof. They've taught me how to empathise with situations I may not be close enough to truly understand at first glance. They've allowed me to take charge, but know when to step back, to listen, and have given me a vocabulary around other people when usually my mind would just go completely blank. And probably most importantly, they've taught me that I shouldn't attack myself so harshly for any form of failure. For years now, I've been running from people afraid they'll view me as some sort of imbecile, from opportunities afraid that I'll tear them down from the inside, not due to maliciousness, but just to sheer idiocy. But I also think I've been running away from the things I love doing, afraid of judgment. But replaying Firewatch and playing through all these games that I've shown, and writing, filming, editing this whole video has made me realise one thing. I am getting very tired of running. So I know this is a ramshackle operation at best, and I've been quiet for ages, but I also feel like I need to stop denying myself the opportunity of doing something that I really enjoy. So, let's try this again.